Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the fourth in our series of Advanced Acceleration Technology and MRI webinars. Just a bit of housekeeping before I pass you over to the speaker today. So webinar has been recorded, as you've just heard, and the recording will be available on the IPEM Conferences YouTube channel, hopefully by the end of today, if not then early next week. If you have any questions about the content as we go through the webinar, then please just type them into the chat. I will be able to keep an eye on that as we go through the presentation and may answer some in real time, or I may save them up for the Q&A after the main presentation. And if anyone would like to ask a question in the Q&A session over the microphone, then please just put your hand up towards the end of the presentation or in the Q&A, and I'll be able to unmute you. But I think you're unable to unmute yourself. It'll have to come from one of us. So without any further ado, I'll pass you across to Mike Hutton for the main presentation. So Mike is the MR lead physicist at the Christie in Manchester, and he's also the co-chair of the IPEM MRI AAT Task and Finish Group. Mike, I'll let you take it from here.
Okay, thanks, Steve. So hello, everyone. Welcome to this Philips-focused Advanced Acceleration Technology in MR webinar. So webinar number 4 in our series. Just an overview of what I'm going to talk about today, what I'm going to go through. So I'm going to start with a background refresher. So this is for anyone who wasn't in the first of the webinars or anyone who was there who's maybe forgotten what was covered. Then I'm going to go through the implementation of the AAT from Philips, talk a bit about user implementation guidance. Then I've got a number of examples, image sequence and protocol examples with the Philips AAT. Then I'll talk a bit about challenges and then some of the patient and service benefits that we have seen and we expect to see from the Philips AAT. So firstly, just a bit of a refresher, a bit of a reminder for everyone. So when we talk about AAT, we're referring to these 3 technologies. So compressed sensing, simultaneous multi-slice and artificial intelligence, so deep learning reconstruction techniques. With these techniques, we've already seen, we've got demonstrated examples of the benefits, so shorter scan times leading to shorter appointment slot times and therefore increased patient throughput, also improved patient compliance and patient experience. And crucially with these techniques, we can achieve those benefits without compromising image quality. So that's the key difference between these and conventional acceleration techniques. So these webinars have been arranged through the IPEM AAT Task and Finish Group. So we were established to provide guidance for MR departments on the purchase and implementation of AAT. And as most of you will know, this is the 4th webinar. All these webinars are available or will be available on the IPEM Conferences YouTube channel to view. Just a little bit of background on the Task and Finish Group. So we were formed in autumn 2022. We consist of a group of clinical MR physicists from across the UK and Ireland. And we aim to create the following resources for clinical colleagues in MR, hopefully by the end of 2023 or into 2024. So firstly, we have now produced a website with up-to-date and detailed information on AAT from the 3 main manufacturers and some user experience information in there as well. That is now live for both IPEM and non-IPEM members, and Steve is going to put a link to that in the chat now, or you may have done already. We set out to arrange some webinars, so here they are. These are the webinars, so we've done those almost. We also aim to provide a set of example protocols with AAT implemented across the main manufacturers. And I think the significant demand for that, particularly from departments that maybe don't have any significant MR physics input, so to see what's actually possible. Those will be available soon. As soon as they are available, we will publicize as widely as possible to make everyone aware that they can be accessed and you can use them. Final output is going to be a topical report, which is going to be a detailed report summarizing practical implementation of AAT with detailed case studies and discussion of the impact on radiology services. We expect that to be available early 2024, maybe a bit later in 2024. Okay, so on to the Philips AAT, and firstly, a little bit of background on what's available from Philips. Firstly, they released their conventional acceleration technology Sense back in 1999. That was upgraded to digital D-Stream Sense in 2011. Then the first of the AAT techniques was actually released in 2016, multiband Sense, so their SMS implementation. That was followed closely by compressed sense that could be applied to Cartesian acquisitions. And then more recently, actually towards the end of 2022, they released SmartSpeed and SmartSpeed AI. So SmartSpeed allows compressed sense to be applied to non-Cartesian acquisitions, and SmartSpeed AI is as the name suggests, the artificial intelligence implementation from Philips. So the ones in bold are the AAT and the ones I'm going to be talking about today. So I'm just going to start now by going through a bit of the basics of these different techniques and then the Philips implementation of the techniques. So starting with multiband sense. So the generic technique is simultaneous multi-slice, and as many of you already know, this uses a multiband RF excitation. So we excite spins from 2 or more slices simultaneously. We collect that data. If we just collect that data and don't do anything else, then all that information is overlaid onto a single slice. But we can use coil sensitivity information like we would do with parallel imaging to unwrap that data into a separate 2 or more slices. So the implementation from Philips is multiband sense, or MB sense. So again, use a multiband RF excitation. Philips use a phase shift and then sense unfolding to unwrap the overlaid slice data. So the phase shift is there to improve the unwrapping performance when the coil sensitivity profile of the 2 or more slices is very similar. MB sense can be combined with conventional sense, so you can have slice acceleration and in-plane acceleration as well. It's only available in 3T systems though on R5.7 or later, so if you're on 1.5T, you won't have multiband sense from Philips. Next up is compressed sense and the SmartSpeed compressed sense options. So the reminder of compressed sensing, the generic technique. So the key elements of compressed sensing are firstly an incoherent or a pseudo-random subsampling of K-space. So this first diagram is showing, and if we do that and reconstruct an image, then we get a very noisy image, but it's got an incoherent smear of noise across it. Then compressed sensing uses an iterative reconstruction technique with denoising. So generally we use the wavelet domain to do the denoising. So we remove noise from the image, then we reconstruct another image, and then we compare that image with the acquired data for consistency. And we go around this loop until we meet a given threshold or the maximum number of iterations have been reached. So it's an iterative reconstruction technique. In general, we're looking to minimize the product of 2 properties, so the data consistency and something called the transform sparsity. And in effect, what we're doing is we're checking that we've removed the noise and we've removed enough noise, but we've not removed too much noise that updated image isn't then consistent with the acquired data. So the implementation of this by Philips, they call it compressed sense or CS sense, and it's got the same key components. So we've firstly got subsampling of K-space. So Philips use a sparse variable density subsampling, and there's an example of the sort of image we would see from that acquired data with this smear of noise. Philips use the coil sensitivity map from the sense reference scan. They use background data from the Q body coil, and a quote from the white paper on this technique is that constrains the solution during regularization. I'll be honest, I don't know exactly what that means, but it does sound quite important. Then similar to the generic technique, they use wavelet domain for the denoising, and we go around in this loop in our iterative reconstruction method until that threshold has been met or the max number of iterations have been met. So availability of compressed sense and SmartSpeed across Philips systems. So firstly, if you're in release 5.4 or later, you can have compressed sense. So you may have it on your scanner already, or it will be available to buy. So that's compressed sense for Cartesian acquisitions only. If you're in release 11 or later, so that release 11 was released towards the end of 2022, you can have compressed sense for Cartesian acquisitions, but also these SmartSpeed options as well, which allow you to apply compressed sense to these acquisition techniques. So looking a bit more at these different techniques, firstly, compressed sense. So it's been around for a long time now. Most of you will know what you can and can't do with it. And it can be applied very widely, so 2D and 3D scans of various contrasts and anatomies as well. SmartSpeed MotionFree is a multi-vein type acquisition. So it's motion insensitive acquisition, and you can now apply CS sense to those acquisitions, whereas previously you could only apply sense. These other techniques here, I've separated them off for a reason, because I'm not going to be talking about them today. And that's mainly because we are very limited or no user experience with these new techniques. But I refer you to the Philips website and the SmartSpeed white paper, where you can find out a bit more information on them if you're interested. And then the AI implementation from Philips is SmartSpeed AI, or AI CS Sense as it's called on the scanner. Just the reminder then of AI techniques in MRI acquisition. So these are neural networks that have been trained on real image data or image data sets. And they go through a training phase initially. This is carried out by manufacturers, where the neural network is given pairs of low SNR and high SNR images. And they learn how to take that low SNR image and output a high SNR image. Training phase consists of training on tens of thousands of images and image data sets typically, and then extensive testing once it's been trained as well. When they're deployed clinically, these algorithms, these neural networks are no longer learning, so they're not learning on the job on patient data, and they're just using what they've learned during that training phase. And the way we can use them to accelerate imaging is through acquiring a lower quality image. So we can accelerate that acquisition through using higher acceleration factors or reducing signal averages. And then we put them through this neural network reconstruction algorithm, and we get a higher SNR output. So we can acquire fast, low quality images and use AI to enhance the image quality. So the implementation from Philips, AI CS Sense. So this is deep learning that's been applied to the case-based data during the denoising step of compressed sense reconstruction. So diagram here is taken from the Philips white paper that summarizes all the different elements of SmartSpeed, and I put big red boxes around the parts that are relevant for AI CS Sense. So we have the subsampling, pseudorandom or incoherent subsampling of case space. We have the sense reference scan and this background data. And then the key difference between AI CS Sense and CS Sense is that we replace the wavelet denoising step with AI-based denoising. So the AI CS Sense neural network has been trained with CS Sense data as the input. In effect, when you're using AI CS Sense, you select it in place of CS Sense in most cases, and you should be able to achieve higher reduction factors through the improved denoising from the AI-based denoising. It's applicable to 2D and 3D Cartesian sequences at the moment, so that's in release 11. That's a user selectable denoising strength, come with other vendors as well. But this improves SNR only, so it doesn't improve the resolution in an image. It only acts to improve the SNR in that image. So a common question, it probably always gets asked that actually when we start talking about AI reconstruction techniques, is what data has that neural network been trained on? So the answer for Philips is that it's been trained on a combination of phantom healthy volunteer and patient and pathological image data. So it's been trained in all three. And one of the interesting bits of information I got from Philips was that the regulators are actually more interested in the range of data that the software has been tested on as opposed to what it's been trained on. So they're interested in the range of MR images that it's been tested on, but also something called domain shifting, where the neural network is tested on non-MR images. So that's interesting. I don't know what the significance of testing on non-MR images is, but I think it's just interesting. It shows the hoops that manufacturers need to jump through to get these CE marked for clinical use. Okay, so moving on to user implementation guidance. So I'm going to go through each of the different techniques and talk a bit about how we might want to go about implementing these and using them in general. Starting with multiband sense. So I'm not going to spend too much time on multiband sense because it's quite a small part of the bigger picture with the Philips acceleration techniques. It applies to EPI readouts only, so DTI, fMRI, DWI type acquisitions only. We can acquire up to 8 simultaneous slices for fMRI, but that doesn't mean we're going to get good images with a factor of 8, but that's the maximum factor you can select on the scanner. Actually, for DTI, Philips recommend a maximum multiband sense factor of 2. And common across vendors, again, if you can't reduce your TR or make other changes to your protocol, it may not be possible to save time using multiband sense, but it often will be. Multiband sense, as I mentioned, can be combined with conventional in-plane sense, and we can have fractional factors, which is very useful. And for DTI, the number of slices divided by the multiband sense factor should be an odd number, and that's to improve the unwrapping performance of the sense algorithm. So it's a useful technique. It's a good one to have if you're on a 3T system doing lots of neuro work, but we'd expect it to have fairly minimal service impact. But for individual patients and those scans where it can be used, there are definite benefits for patients and for services. So CS sense implementation. So this is just the Cartesian what I'm talking about at the moment. So used widely across Philips sequences, 2D and 3D, any or almost any Cartesian sequence. In general, our finding, and I think elsewhere, is that a CS sense factor up to about 2.5 in 2D imaging at 1.5T is about as far as you can push these, but you can have higher factors in 3D imaging, and if you're at 3T, you might be able to push it a bit further as well. You can have whole number of signal averages only. One of the important things to note with CS sense, so if you select CS sense after having sense on your image and you make use of the relative SNR that's displayed on the scanner, that figure won't change, but that doesn't mean the SNR in the image isn't changing. So particularly when you're using high denoising factors, the SNR should be significantly improved with CS sense. You can select save raw data when you're acquiring with CS sense, and then you can do retrospective reconstructions with different denoising levels, so to assess the effects of the different denoising levels without acquiring a sequence 3 times. And common across vendors, we need to be aware when we're using higher denoising levels that it may introduce some blurring in the image. Screenshots there are from release 11 Philips software, showing the acceleration options that are available, and also showing when you've selected CS sense that you have choice of reduction factor, and you can choose a denoising level as well. So to the best of my understanding, system default is always medium, but you can select weak or high denoising instead of system default if you want to. Specifically for MSK imaging, so we have found that the Philips provided 3D CS sense sequences are good out the box for foot, ankle, and knee imaging. Might need a bit of modification for other anatomies. Fast 2D sequences are often going to be preferable to longer 3D sequences. So a number of reasons for that. So it's partly due to the longer echo train length or shot length for 3D sequences, leading to a bit of blurring and sharpness in the image, but also a longer 3D scan, particularly with CS sense. If you have any patient movement during the acquisition, then that's going to impact your imaging more than a shorter movement during a shorter 2D scan. Then moving on to SmartSpeed MotionFree implementation. So this is applicable to multiple 2D, TSE, and FFE sequences. It's only compatible with sense or CS sense. So when you select MotionFree, you don't get the option at the moment to apply AI CS sense. But it's still very useful. It gives you rapid, motion insensitive acquisitions and the ability to use CS sense. You can use CS sense without having to worry about the movement artifacts and increased movement artifacts. Our experience with this is still quite limited, but I think it's similar application considerations to Cartesian CS sense. So the same sort of factor should be possible, but obviously you don't need to worry as much about motion. And screenshots again from release 11 showing when you select MotionFree, you then only have the option of sense or CS sense acceleration. Moving on to AI CS sense, so the AI element of the Philips implementation. So again, wide-scale use of this across 2D and 3D sequences. Any or almost any Cartesian sequence can have AI CS sense applied to it. So you should now be able to, or you will be able to increase your reduction factor, your acceleration factor using AI CS sense compared to CS sense, or even compared to sense. So go above 2.5 in 2D imaging, but only moderately in our experience. So we're not talking about being able to double the reduction factor or anything like that. So if the maximum before was 2.5, the new maximum now might be 3 or a bit above 3. And obviously that depends on your sequence, your intrinsic SNR, your slice thickness, things like this. So I think in general, you would choose to use AI CS Sense over CS Sense if it's available, even if you're just having fairly low reduction factors, and that's to take advantage of the improved denoising from the AI denoising compared to wavelet denoising. For 3D imaging, certainly possible now to have AI CS Sense factors of greater than 5, and similar to CS Sense, you can only have a whole number of NSAs when you select AI CS Sense. Again, you can select raw data, you can apply different denoising levels in post-processing. Our experience so far is suggesting that weak denoising may be the best option for MSK imaging in many cases, and that's because it retains a more normal image appearance. So that's going to be very sequence dependent and radiology dependent as well, radiologist dependent and their preference, but I think they generally like to see a bit of noise, and with the high denoising factors, they can look quite smooth, and I've got some examples later just to demonstrate that. Again, need to be aware of blurring when using high denoising levels. And another finding of ours, which we're still looking into, is that appears to be fairly minimal benefit of using AI CS Sense with standard spin echo sequences, and that as soon as you start to push the reduction factor, you get a very noisy image, and it can affect the image contrast as well. Okay, so moving on then to some image sequence and protocol examples with these AAT techniques from Philips. I'm going to start with a quick multiband sense one just for completeness. So this is multiband sense applied to DTI on a Philips Elition 3T system, multiband sense factor using the Philips recommendation of 2, and the acquisition time is just over 3 minutes. So multiband sense in this case has been used to reduce the acquisition time, not to enable any appointment slot time reductions, but just for patient experience and patient compliance. So these acquisitions can obviously be very long at times. So 3 minutes is pretty good for a DTI acquisition. So there's no real significant impact from this technique, given how infrequently it will be used, even in a neurocenter. Minimal impact on service, but some patient benefits there. Next example, so the first of the CS Sense examples. So this is on a Philips Ingenia 3T system. So this is showing the original clinical sequence on the left-hand side with sense applied, 5.5 minute acquisition and the sense factor 2.5. And then following optimization, time has come down by about 1:50 using a CS Sense factor of 3. So very, very good time saving there, about 34% saved off the acquisition time. And if we zoom in a bit, we can see that the image quality is comparable, if not slightly improved in the accelerated acquisition. So we've got a good time saving and probably improved image quality as well. And then looking across the whole protocol, so the original protocol had sense on all sequences. The optimized one moved to CS Sense. About 5 minutes was shaved off the total acquisition time. So that's allowed potentially for the appointment slot time to be reduced by 5 minutes, as well as having slightly improved image quality and better patient compliance from those shorter sequences. Another example with CS Sense, this time in the brain IAMS protocol, so T2 3D drive, high-res sequence. Original had sense, factor 1.8, and then that's moved to CS Sense with factor 3.5. Also in this example, we tried reducing the echo train length to see how much of an impact that has on the image sharpness, and it had some effect, but it was felt that the middle example here, it's about 3 minutes long with CS 3.5 was the best solution. So we've got a good time saving again, about 27% reduction in scan time, maintained image quality, and again, if we zoom in, we can see a bit more clearly that there's very little difference between those 3 acquisitions. Then across the whole protocol, so IAMS is always going to be a very short protocol, so there's not that much time you can shave off these, but just by applying CS Sense here, it's knocked a few minutes off, and that's allowed in this case, in this hospital, they could reduce the appointment slot time for an IAMS examination by 5 minutes. So good image quality, better patient compliance, but also a slight impact on throughput in this department as well. Next example, again with CS Sense in a Tumour Brain protocol. This example was provided by Rosa from University Hospitals, Birmingham. This on a Philips Ingenia system, so CS applied through mainly 3D, across mainly 3D acquisitions. So the top row is the original sequences, the bottom row are the optimized ones, and you can see a pretty impressive time saving across this protocol of about 31%. And in one case, the T1 spin echo, the 2D T1 spin echo has also been replaced by a 3D sequence to take full advantage of compressed sense, high compressed sense factors in 3D imaging. Another example now with MotionFree, so compressed sense applied with some artSpeed MotionFree. So this is a volunteer who was instructed to fidget on the right hand side, and they were still on the left hand side. So you can see, comparing right to left, that the image on the right is worse. There is some artifact in that image. There is evidence of movement, but I think given how much the volunteer was moving, there's been pretty effective reduction of motion artifact in there through the MotionFree acquisition. I don't have an image to share, but I think had that been a Cartesian CSN's acquisition, then very likely it would be undiagnostic if this was in a patient. So the main benefit here is being able to apply CS sense acceleration, get faster imaging, but without the normal concerns about patient movement. Another example with MotionFree, this time in the brain. So CS sense on the left-hand side and normal Cartesian acquisition with a volunteer moving their head, instructed to fidget and move around like a patient would do. And then on the right-hand side, CS sense MotionFree. So you can see the very characteristic CS sense and movement-based artifact with that sort of high frequency ghosting on the left, but no evidence of any motion artifact on the right-hand side. So we've got really effective reduction in the motion artifact in this case. Another example with MotionFree, this time just looking at the difference in image appearance between MotionFree, a standard multi-vein acquisition with sense, and then a Cartesian acquisition with no parallel imaging. I guess the key points to note here are fairly comparable image appearance across the three acquisitions, but this subject wasn't moving. We can see some difference in contrast in the multi-vein and MotionFree compared to the Cartesian. When these images were reviewed by one of our neuroradiologists, they did comment on some ringing artifact in the periphery of the brain in the MotionFree example, but it wasn't felt to be a major issue and anything that would affect the diagnostic use of the images. And the MotionFree sequence is now used in the routine clinical brain protocol in this hospital. Final example with MotionFree, this time in the shoulder. So this is comparing an original clinical sequence with multi-vein and sense factor 1 and spare fat saturation with a MotionFree spare acquisition with CS sense factor 2. It's got fairly comparable image quality. Subject wasn't moving in this case, and we've got better fat saturation with the spare fat saturation. Contrast with the MotionFree is in this case very comparable to Cartesian acquisition. So we've got very modest time saving in this case, but we've got a more robust image and better fat saturation from using spare. Now moving on to AI CS sense examples. So example 1 is Tumour Brain protocol, so a 3D sagittal high res or grain echo sequence in the brain. So this is moving from CS sense to AI CS sense. So the original had factor 3, optimized with AI CS sense as factor 4.5 with medium denoising in this case. So we've got a reasonable reduction in scan time, 22%, but just worth noting, had we gone from sense to AI CS sense in 1 leap, we'd be seeing something much more impressive. We've got comparable image quality here and a good reduction in scan time. So that's from a Tumour protocol. This is the routine brain protocol in this hospital on this system. So this was optimized through applying a combination of MotionFree and CS sense and AI CS sense to the original protocol. We've got a fairly modest time saving at the moment, but it is a work in progress. It's not a finished protocol. You see we've used MotionFree in 2 of the sequences with CS sense. there's a good time saving in case of one, and then the time's gone up in the other, and that's because there was a need to improve image quality somewhat. We've not quite nailed the coronal flare sequence, so there were some issues with the AI-CS sense in that sequence. We need to revisit that, but we've still got an extra 3 minutes during that appointment slot for the radiographers to do other things. So talk to patients, setting patients up, or if there's any repeat scans needed. So there's still a benefit there, even though we've not managed to save enough time to bring the appointment slot down. Now moving on to some AI-CS sense examples. So first example in the knee. This is moving from sense to AI-CS sense in one go. So the original clinical sequence with sense factor 1.4 has gone to AI-CS sense factor 2.4. In this case with medium denoising, so very, very good time saving there, 38% reduction in scan time, very comparable image appearance in this case as well. And if we zoom in, we can see in this case with medium denoising, we've actually got quite a comparable image appearance still. We haven't got that any significant blurring in that image, and we can still see a bit of noise, which may be reassuring for radiologists. Next example, again, AI-CS sense in the knee, this time looking at the difference between the two denoising factors, so weak and medium denoising. So left-hand side, original clinical sequence with sense factor 1.2, then we've got CS sense factor 2 in the middle and the right-hand side images, but with different denoising levels. And you can probably see even from those images, even if you're on a small monitor, that the image on the right hand side looks quite different. It looks very smooth. There's no obvious noise in that image like in the original. And if we zoom in a little bit, we can see, I think, a bit more clearly that this has got quite a modified appearance compared to the original, whereas the weak denoising, less blurring, less smoothing of the noise, and maybe preferable for many radiologists. So we've got a good time saving there, and using weak denoising, we can almost match image appearance in general. So across this knee protocol, because we've gone from only having sense applied to applying AI-CS sense, then we've got a really healthy time saving. So it's gone down from over 16 minutes down to around 9 minutes, about 7-minute time saving across the protocol. So that's definitely enough to bring the appointment slot down by a bit, but also improve patient compliance from having some very short sequences in there that reduce the chance of patient motion. Another example this time in the prostate with AI-CS sense. So this is going from sense all the way to AI-CS sense again. So factor 1.3 to factor 2, and this time with medium denoising. Really good time saving with comparable general image appearance. It's a work in progress protocol. It's not approved for clinical use yet, but things are looking very good. And then last example, AI-CS sense in the shoulder. Original had sense, optimized has AI-CS sense, and this time we've used weak denoising. So we've got a reasonable time saving, not as big as some of the others, but still a reasonable time saving. We've got comparable, probably improved general image appearance. And in this case, the weak denoising was considered to be the best denoising level to use, and that's probably partly due to the intrinsically low SNR in this image. Okay, so hopefully there's enough examples there just to give you a flavour of what's possible with the Philips software, in particular, the new AI CS sense option. So I'm just going to talk a little bit now about some of the challenges in implementing the Philips AAT software, and starting with the very obvious one, which is artifacts. So with CS sense, compressed sensing, I think artifacts are pretty well documented now, and solutions or mitigations are well understood as well. So there's a very good paper reference here where some of these images have been taken from that goes through the different, the more normal and the more exotic types of artifacts we can see with CS sense. So the one we're most likely to see, I think, in routine imaging are enhanced movement artifacts using CS sense, and this is what the top diagram is demonstrating. So the middle image is a sense acquisition where the patient or volunteer is moving, and then on the right hand side a CS sense artifact where the patient's in the same, or the volunteer is in the same movement. So we can see we've got this ghosting artifact in both examples, but with CS sense we get a much higher frequency ghosting artifact across the image, so it's somewhat more severe than with sense. There's also well documented artifacts such as streaky linear and wax layer that can affect specific 3D sequences. You know, we haven't seen these in the work that we've done. I'd be interested to know if anyone else has seen these sort of artifacts in their clinical imaging. What we have seen though are artifacts relating to CS sense and movement, and this is an example on the right hand side where a volunteer coughed during a CS sense acquisition, and there's quite a significant, quite a serious artifact across that image. When they did the same with a standard sense acquisition, then there was no such artifact, so it was related to the CS sense reconstruction. So more generally, challenges with the Philips software, and I guess focus on the new software AI CSN. So there's still very limited experience with SmartSpeed and AI CSN nationally. So we only had access to these new options back in December. I think many people are only just getting them now, or have only had them for a few months. So I think experience is still quite limited in how to make the most of them. If you are going from having well implemented CS sense across your protocols and across your service, and then to AI CS sense, I think the gains you'll see will be relatively small and incremental. They'll still be beneficial, but you won't see a huge reduction in acquisition times like you will do if you go from sense all the way to AI CS sense. And I guess the challenge with AI CS sense is that we've not been able to use factors that are significantly higher than is possible with CSN. So we can go up a bit, but as soon as we go up a bit too much, then it very quickly impacts image quality, and we need to knock it back down again. Another challenge that we found, so we've done a lot of work with Philips, with Siemens and GE scanners now, implementing AAT. And on Siemens and GE scanners, we have a fairly standard recipe in a lot of cases where we can apply the AI reconstruction software options from those manufacturers in a fairly standard way, and have confidence that it'll just work, and often almost do the optimization blind, and then not really need to adapt that very much afterwards. We've not really found that with Philips. It's very sequence dependent, and I think it always requires a bit of trial and error to see how far you can push things to optimize a sequence for time. So for example, in some cases you can knock a signal average off when you move to AI CSNs, but in other cases you can't. And just I guess going back to the last slide now as well, movement artifact is expected to be worse with CSNs and AI CSNs, but if you've got access to SmartSpeed MotionFree, then that removes some of that challenge, some of those worries about movement. Right, now on to an example of patient and service benefits from implementation of AAT across that service. So this is from a Philips Ingenia 3T system that is on software version R5.7. They have access to CS Sense only. So they don't have AI, CS Sense, or SmartSpeed. We don't yet have an example of implementation of AI, CS Sense. We're a few months off having anything that we could share. As covered by Steve in the first webinar, a lot of the optimization work that we've been doing is through volunteer imaging initially. So we had 4 volunteer imaging sessions of protocol optimization. Images were then reviewed by radiologists, and in most cases approved for trial in clinical use, and then moved into clinical use as soon as possible. In this department, on the scanner, the base protocols were already time optimized, so they're already quite lean, no wiggle room really, and not that much that could be shaved off them. Definitely no time wasted. So you know, we could accelerate them, but there wasn't simple stuff we could do. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make, that would reduce acquisition times. So the diagram on the bottom is just an overview of the process we went through. The key points here are: software was installed in March. We did the optimization work with the volunteer sessions in May, and then by around September, October time, these protocols were in routine clinical use, and the department were starting to benefit from the reduced acquisition and appointment slot times. Then looking at the core set of protocols that were optimized during this process initially. So this is showing those protocols, old acquisition time, the new acquisition time after CSNs had been applied wherever it could be, and then any adjustments in the appointment slot times as well. And you can see that in some cases, but not all, we've managed to shave off 5 minutes from the appointment slot time. And the net effect of this plus subsequent optimization work on some additional protocols has been an estimated additional 57 patients per month across this service, so about 12% increase in throughput. And that's been demonstrated by reduced waiting lists, but also there's been direct benefits reported from patients. So for example, one of the other protocols that's been optimized is the breast protocol, and patients have told radiographers that they find the experience much less unpleasant just from having much shorter acquisition time. And just one point to make here around, and Steve may have touched on this already, but around measuring the impact of AAT, and it's actually a non-trivial thing to do. So we set out thinking we could do it through looking at some risk data, but actually that's not very reliable because there's so many other factors that influence how many patients are scanned on a given day, week or month. And we found that it was very dependent on which period you compared the numbers you got. So we think the best way to try to assess AAT and the benefits is by looking at those appointment slot adjustment times and then adding up the total extra time that you've got given an estimate of the number of each examination type that's done per month, and then doing a comparison of old versus new and seeing the projected or the potential number of additional patients you can be scanning. And we think that's probably a more robust way to do it than looking at any risk data with all those other factors that can influence it. So that's just something to bear in mind. If you've benefited from the NHS EI funded software, at some point you will need to report back to NHS EI whether there've been benefits from this software. And I think you just need to think very carefully about how you can provide reliable and robust data. Okay, so just summing up now. So firstly, just overview of benefits from Philips AAT. So CS Sense is obviously well established. It's been around for a long time. There's lots in the literature and around that demonstrates the time savings that can be made if you implement this across full range of protocols. You can apply it to 2D and 3D sequences, so very, very useful. SmartSpeed MotionFree, really useful as well because you've got these motion insensitive, these bladed acquisitions where you can now accelerate them with CS Sense if you have access to the MotionFree software. If you're going from Sense all the way to SmartSpeed or AI CS Sense in one leap, then you'll see really big time reductions if possible, and you'll bring sequence times down by a lot. Whereas if you're going from CS Sense to AI CS Sense and CS Sense has been implemented across your service already, you'll see some moderate time savings, but they won't be huge like they are with the Sense to AI CS Sense change. As I've said already, user experience with the new AI CS Sense in particular is very limited, but our work today is suggesting that it's it's easiest to implement in MSK and pelvic imaging, and it's a bit more challenging in some other anatomies, so in the spine and brain, for example. But there's very good, very impressive time savings can be made quite easily in MSK. Okay, just to summarize, so another point to make is our experience in the northwest of England, so the work we've done, again, across multiple vendor systems, is that AI CS Sense is actually quite challenging to implement, and that's more so than the AI solution from other vendors. But to caveat that, experience is still quite limited, so I think we're all just learning how best to make use of it, and I think we will get there eventually. But I think at the moment, MR physics and apps input is probably crucial to making the most of AI CS Sense. So if you want to optimize these options, you definitely need some input from physics and app specialists. And I've got optimize in bold here because what we're trying to do in this process in our region anyway is to fully to make optimum use to fully implement these techniques across all protocols and see the biggest benefit possible. So you don't need an MR physicist to turn AI CS Sense on, for example, and knock your acceleration or reduction factor up by a little bit. But if you want to optimize them, there's a lot more work is needed. And one bit of good news, which some of you will be aware of, software release 12 from Philips is expected in early 2024. And that is going to come with an additional option for AI resolution enhancement, which I think is going to be called Precise AI. That'll be really interesting because it may resolve some of the issues with the blurring with higher denoising factors, but it also gives another option potentially to accelerate imaging through reducing the acquisition matrix a little bit and then using the the AI to give you back your resolution in the image. And just one last thing, just drawing your attention to this. Hopefully Steve has put the link in the chat and you can have a look at it, but this is now live and you can have a look at it. And we'd be very interested in hearing from anyone who's working on implementation of AAT, if there's anything they think needs to be added here, if you've got user experience now with Philips software in particular, and the other smart speed techniques, we'll be very keen to hear from you. So if you go to the website, mine and Steve's email addresses are in there, so please get in touch and we can have a chat and then hopefully get the resource updated. We will be constantly updating this over the coming months and years as well. Finally, just quick thank you to the other members of the AAT Task and Finish group. Also thanks to my colleagues at the Christie who've been working with me and trusting the region in implementing AAT, and also thanks to radiographer and radiologist colleagues in the region who've been working with us as well. So I'll pass you back to Steve to take some questions.
Thank you very much, Mike. That was really, really good. We've got around about 12 minutes or so for questions. There's a couple that came in. Well, there's one that came in just towards the end of the webinar there that I'll start with. And if anyone else has got any burning questions, if you can start typing them now, then that would be appreciated. So there's one from Rosa. So you mentioned it's more difficult to optimize Philips protocols compared to other vendors, and that this can be sequence dependent. Is this due to CS and CS AI being available in most of the sequences compared to Siemens, for example, where AI is only available in TSE? Is it potentially something related to kind of how widely applicable it is?
I mean, I think that could definitely be a factor in that there are sequences, cases where it works well. So MSK, for example, where it's pretty straightforward to implement AI CS sense. I think that's part of it, but also I think tying the AI denoising to compress sense has potentially, in my opinion, made it more complicated than it is for other vendors. So with Siemens, the AI is completely separate to any specific acceleration technique. So I guess what is the answer there? Maybe is probably the answer, and we'll probably find out more as we gain experience in our group and across the country as well.
Yeah, that's great. And then a second one as part of that same message. The experience optimizing compressed sense on a Siemens versus a Philips platform. I guess it's just discussing the big difference in terms of the kind of the application of compressed sense across the vendors.
Yeah, so I mean, the main difference. So we have no experience on Canon systems. So Canon systems also allow you to apply compressed sensing to 2D and 3D sequences. So and I've experience in using compressed sense on Siemens or GE scanners, and there it's very, very limited in its application. And I think particularly with the AI solutions from those vendors being very effective, there's not been very much focus on optimizing compressed sensing and compressed sense. So, you know, the basic fact that you've got to use compressed sense on Philips, even now with AI solution across all your sequences, means that it's a very different process. And there is a lot more experience and a lot more in the literature, I guess, on compressed sense than there is with optimizing compressed sensing on a Siemens scanner, for example.
Yeah, thanks. So there's not been anything posted in the Q&A so far, and there's not a huge amount. There's nothing else coming through the webinar chat as well. So I've got one that I can ask based on the questions so far. Sorry, based on the presentation, and that is, you mentioned kind of the volunteer imaging approach that's been taken in the Northwest. I think it would just be worthwhile discussing the reasons for taking that approach versus the other options that were available, given the scope of what how the project has been rolled out in the Northwest.
Yeah, sure. So when probably everyone's not aware of the background, but we got funding back in early 2022 in the Northwest to apply AAT to Philips, GE and Siemens systems, and our group of physicists from the Christie, we work across the region. So we've been supporting a number of trusts to implement AAT on their scanners, and we're we're not an unlimited resource as well. So we wanted to come up with a very efficient way to do this optimization work and to support the trusts that we work with. Also, the standard methodology for applying new options is generally just doing it during patient imaging, and there's the kind of suck it and see option that often comes from apps, and they just change something and you have confidence in apps that everything's going to be okay. But with these techniques, when we first had access to them, apps had or in the case of some manufacturers anyway, apps had very limited practical experience in implementing them. So a lot of the responsibility for applying these and optimizing them was falling on the radiographers and us as physicists. So we decided that we would use volunteer imaging, and there's lots of advantages of that, because you can get that direct comparison between your original protocol and then the optimized protocol when you've applied your AAT. You can try lots of different options. You can mess around in a way that you can't really do in patient imaging. We had a limit for our volunteers of about 2 hours, so we'd leave a single volunteer on the scanner for 2 hours, and not beyond that. That's definitely enough, but you get a lot done and try a lot of different options within that 2-hour period. The downside of volunteer imaging, which everyone will be aware of, I think, is that you're imaging healthy volunteers, so you're not imaging pathology, so you're not necessarily seeing how they perform in patients with pathology, and perhaps not seeing how they perform in patients who are more prone to movement than a well-behaved volunteer would be. So, but I think it has been a very effective approach. We definitely recommend it elsewhere if you're trying to implement this technology, but we do recognize that it's a big decision to give up clinical time to do this work. But if you do the work well, then you can, that payback time is very short if you're getting extra capacity and shorter scan times as well.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you, Mike. We've had one more question about whether we've got an equivalent webinar for Siemens, so I've shared the link for that. That just leads me to remind everyone that the discussion here will be, or the webinar rather, will be uploaded to YouTube as soon as possible after today's session. And I've got one question popped up in the Q&A just now. So where can I look up sequence parameters for imaging with Siemens Deep Resolve, or do the default settings work fine?
Do you want to answer that one, or shall I answer it? I mean, it's kind of off topic a little bit, but let me just check the question, see exactly what's been asked. I
think
mean,
it's
if we're
probably
talking about
referring
Deep
to
Resolve, there aren't that many parameters you can change anyway, and I think the short answer is the default settings generally do work quite well, and you won't need to change them. But if you're talking about accelerating imaging, then there's other steps you need to take as well as applying Deep Resolve. And as I said earlier, we're hoping to share some example protocols. So when those are available, then you'll be able to see some of the examples of what's been done elsewhere and how protocols have been optimized.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks, Mike. Let's double check. It looks like we've pretty much come to the end of everything we need to get through today. So for everyone who's been in attendance, thank you very much for being with us. And again, the links will go out for if you want to share with colleagues, and will be shared with the wider community as well. So thanks again to Mike, and thank you to our audience. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. Have a good weekend.